Joined now by Advocate Paul Hoffman, Director at Accountability Now. Advocate Hoffman, a very good evening to you. Welcome, and thank you for your patience tonight. First things first, Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's interview has just now concluded. Is politics what is ultimately likely to cost him a shot at this job?
Oh, I think that the main problem that he has is that he would only serve for 2 years. And you noticed right at the end that the acting chair of the JSC pointed out that we have in fact had a short-lived Chief Justices in the distant past. That was Chief Justice Stratford in 1938 to 39. And of course, in more recent times, Chief Justice Sandile Qobo only served for 2 years. There was litigation at the end of his term because there was a desire to extend his term, which was illegal or was found to be illegal by the court. And as a consequence of that, he too was a short-lived Chief Justice. Whereas Mogoeng was a Chief Justice for a very long time because he was very junior in the court when he was appointed as Chief Justice. The problem really is that if you want to appoint a senior judge, and if you only allow your judges in the Constitutional Court to serve in that court for 12 years, which is what the Constitution says, then you're caught in a bit of a dilemma because the unexpired term is sometimes, if you're going to use a senior judge, is sometimes shorter than you would like it to be if you are seeking, as everybody seems to want to do,
so to
improve and transform.
The Judicial Service Commission will now go into deliberations. That's due to happen tomorrow. We've already heard from the likes of Commissioner Mpofu that is where some of the issues around the political questions around the acting Chief Justice Zondo's handling of issues related to the former President Jacob Zuma. What risk would that pose, I wonder, to the office of the Chief Justice if he were to be ultimately appointed, because those would be recurring questions no matter how short his term?
Yes, all of our judges need to be impartial, independent, and of integrity. And our Chief Justice needs also to have the necessary gravitas and unimpeachability that you add to those judicial qualities. And those have certainly been kicked around quite extensively, in particular in the interviews of Judge President Malambo and today's interview of Acting Chief Justice Zondo. But what we need to bear in mind is that this entire process before the Judicial Service Commission does not bind anyone. The Judicial Service Commission, when it is finished its behind closed doors deliberations tomorrow, is going to report to the President about its take on the interviews. And the President is not obliged to accept any recommendation that is made, or indeed any findings that are presented to the President. In fact, what the President does is he consults with the leaders of the opposition political parties in the National Assembly. He consults with the Judicial Service Commission, which is what this interview process precedes, and then he makes his own, after the consultations, he makes his own decision as to which of these four is the best of the candidates. Now, I think it's fair to say that all four of the candidates would not have got through the preliminary rounds if they were not fit and proper persons, at least on a prima facie level. And so it's really going to boil down to what it is that the President wants in his Chief Justice.
So given then, Advocate Hoffman, pardon me, we're just coming up to the top of the hour. I'd like to squeeze in one more question before you and I part ways for the evening. Given that ultimately the decision lies with the President, how much of a difference does what we've been witnessing this week make in the appointment of a Chief Justice? It's the first time where we've had 4 candidates interviewed so publicly, but if the decision ultimately goes back to the President, what was the point of it all?
The point of it all is that our system of governance in South Africa is meant to be open, or if you prefer a fancy word, transparent. Everybody who has bothered to watch any part of these interviews has a better idea of who it is that will become our Chief Justice, and that will promote public confidence in the judiciary and perhaps bring an end to the pressure that the judiciary is placed under. It is the weakest of the arms of government. It has no army, it has no budget of its own, and it depends on the goodwill of the public. Mm-hmm. So it is a good thing that we should know who it is and what they like before we find ourselves with a new Chief Justice that nobody's ever heard of.
Advocate Paul Hoffman, I'm sure we'll speak much more once we get a clear idea of what's coming out of those deliberations due to happen tomorrow. For now, thank you very much for your time as always. You are watching Newzroom Afrika. I'm Tembekile Mkhototo. A roundup of the day's top stories, including more of our coverage on the last interview for the job of Chief Justice in the country. The acting Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, being interviewed tonight, perhaps the longest of the 4 interviews we've heard this week. We started with Justice Madlanga, then came the Judge President of the Supreme Court of Appeals, Mandi Samaya, and then yesterday, Gauteng Judge President Dunstan Lambo was 3rd, and then today, the acting Chief Justice of the country, Raymond Zondo, wrapping things up. I will have much more on that and more for you when we return. Stay